Good morning again, everyone, and welcome to JRG's webinar for April, and our topic this month is DOL audits. They're looking everywhere. So first of all, we would like to go ahead and welcome all of those who are participating based on the partnerships that we have with JRG. Okay, we're trying to advance a slide here. Give us 1 second, please. And again, we thank you. We thank you for your participation with our partners and for participating today. Some just short housekeeping requirements. After the presentation, the webinar today, we will send you the recording of the webinar, and we'll actually send you the PowerPoint. Plus, we will include any type of Word document where I'll answer any questions that you have at the end of the presentation. And for the end of the presentation, if you type your questions into the question box, we'll read them and then we'll go ahead and answer them. So with that being said, let's go ahead and just quickly look at our agenda. It has a lot of a lot of outline here. I'm not going to name each one that we're going to talk about, but we will be touching on all of these today. And the key thing that I do want to touch on is that after decades of basically inattention, the DOL really has launched into an initiative to audit welfare plans, specifically health benefit plans. We've always known they've been out there auditing our retirement plans, but now they're really getting into the health and welfare plans. And while the audit focus is somewhat on compliance with the Affordable Care Act, remember, the key issue is also compliance with ERISA. So that's why they're really reviewing a lot more requirements now. And there is indication that the DOL is really finding major non-compliance issues in the audits that they're performing, and they are assessing penalties on those insufficiencies. So brief background, with a reminder. So ERISA is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. It's been around since 1974, a long time already. However, it's been amended many times throughout the year. It's been amended by COBRA and HIPAA, and most recently the Affordable Care Act. ERISA is the federal law that governs employee benefit plans that provide for specific benefits. We've already mentioned ERISA governs pension plans, but it also governs health and welfare plans. So those plans that provide for medical care, dental, vision, any type of employee assistance programs, disability, life insurance. We also know that ERISA, specifically in the statute, it exempts governmental plans and church plans. However, there are also some exceptions in the regulations that ERISA gives exception to. And that's basically if you have a payroll practice, so that type of benefit, such as a in-house paid disability program out of the general assets of the employer. That's considered a payroll practice and would not be subject to ERISA. So let's talk about the regulating agencies for just a couple minutes here. Now, at the Department of Labor, every time we talk about whether there's going to be an audit or someone's looking at something, we always just say, oh, it's the Department of Labor. Now, the Department of Labor has several enforcement agencies under it. And the first one that we're probably most familiar with is called the Employee Benefit Security Administration, EBSA for short. And the EBSA is responsible for enforcing the requirements of Title I under ERISA with respect to employee-based group health plans. Their key rule is to make sure that the fiduciary standards are being met. They're responsible for the ACA, parts of the ACA reporting, but the IRS also is responsible for ACA reporting. And the key thing under ERISA is always to protect employee rights. So that's what the EBSA is concerned about. The next division, or regulatory agency under the DOL, is the Wage and Hour Division. And this is the division that enforces requirements under the Fair Labor Standards Act, under Fair Medical Leave, and then the WARN Act. And then finally under the DOL, we have the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And we know this is the agency that enforces Title VII, the American with Disabilities Act, the Age Discrimination Employment Act, pregnancy discrimination, genetic information. So we have all those non-discrimination acts that EEOC enforces. In our next blue box, well, we talk about the department is the Treasury Department, and we all know who that enforcement agency is. It's the Internal Revenue Service. And the Internal Revenue Service, its key regulatory requirements as to health plans, we really have to think. Health benefits, remember, they're not taxable to employees. And that's why the IRS always keeps its eye out, because every time an employee receives a benefit, basically the IRS is losing money. So they want to keep a close eye on our health plans, and especially cafeteria plans, because again, those are pre-tax benefits. IRS doesn't collect anything on them. Also, we now know that the IRS is responsible for the information reporting under Section 6056, which is known as the ALA reporting under the Affordable Care Act. And the IRS also oversees pension plans. And then finally, we have the department known as the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, known as CMS. And its regulatory agency is the Department of Health and Human Services, recognized as HHS, and then also the Office of Civil Rights. Now, CMS and HHS, they're really responsible for the enforcement of HIPAA requirements. They look at the HIPAA security, HIPAA privacy, breach of notifications, and then the enforcement comes through the Office of Civil Rights. Just want to go ahead and briefly mention here, today we are talking about DOL audits. However, the IRS and HHS is also in the picture. We just received information within the last month that HHS is conducting HIPAA audits on not only covered group health plans and providers, but also business associates. And they really are focusing on the security side of HIPAA and the privacy side of HIPAA. And then also we have the Internal Revenue Service. Now, the Internal Revenue Service and the Department of Labor kind of work together on their issue that they're really investigating now, because they're looking at the misclassification of employees. They want to make sure that if you're calling someone an independent contractor, that they truly are an independent contractor and not an employee just trying to get out of paying taxes or whatever on the income they earn. So let's look for a minute at some reasons why some of these audits are going on. And probably the most obvious reason is really money. We know penalty can equal money, and that equals revenue to the agency. And the agencies, just like everyone else, they're trying to justify their existence. So they want to make sure that, they are establishing rules. They want to make sure that employers are complying with those rules. And if they're not, the penalties are then applied. Also, the other key issue or reason for audits are because if an agency receives a complaint, it has to respond to it. And generally, especially with health plans now, they're getting a lot of participant complaints, generally because the participant doesn't either understand the terms of the plan or the participant thinks they have been wronged. So that could go ahead and trigger an audit. Probably the most strongest reason for audits that are being performed is what's called this Memorandum of Understanding. And what a Memorandum of Understanding, and I say here, it's like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And what the federal agencies have done is they have entered these understandings, and they basically said, well, if you're out there auditing or reviewing an employer, and you're auditing their group health plan, but you overhear or you find out that they may be violating something under the Fair Labor Standards Act, you go and tell the other department, and then they'll go out and audit them. So it's basically, again, sharing information so that additional audits could be performed. The key thing with these memorandums of understanding is that they've now also entered them with states. So I believe Pennsylvania has a memorandum of understanding. So if a federal agency is looking at a company and they find a state infraction, they'll tell the state and say, you maybe want to go look at this employer. So with that, let's go ahead and look at the next page. So the latest audit initiative, what we have been hearing for the last couple of years is that the Department of Labor intends to audit every group health plan by 2018. Now that's a massive undertaking because right now there are 2.4 million group health plans across the United States. However, they have said they want to make sure that everyone is aware that they're just not going to be looking at employers that have 500 employees or even 100 employees, but everyone who is sponsoring a group health plan. Things that they're looking at or reasons that they have previously audited in the past is because maybe they've learned from a 5500 that there are either delinquent filings or something isn't being done. Good reason for them to go out and audit. Also, when they're auditing, they're looking at medical claims. They're telling us that at least 20% of the claims in our group health plans are being paid incorrectly. To me, that's a big error margin, and I'm sure that they're looking at it. Also, prescription drug programs. In the portion of the news that I look at, there have been a lot of claims against some drug companies, some carriers, and nothing in our area about that, you know, geez, the way they're doing prescription drugs and discounting them, they're not being done according to what the law requires. And then they're looking at plan documents. They're focusing on what does the plan say that participants are supposed to receive, and then actually what's happening in practice. So let's talk about the types of audits, and there are several of them. The first we know is it's called a limited review audit, and even though this may be the easiest audit to go through, at the same time it could be the hardest audit to go through. Because generally the Department of Labor has picked one specific area under compliance that they are looking at. I previously had a client that the DOL, when the client received their audit letter, they were only looking at the mental health parity and how the plan was complying with mental health parity. No other issues. So it was very focused and targeted. The next is a fiduciary audit, and a fiduciary audit is the most extensive audit there is, because when we talk about they're looking everywhere, they will not leave a stone unturned. They're going to look at the plan administration. They want to see, what's your process and procedures? When you have a new employee come on, where's the enrollment form that you use? And they literally will say, we want to see the front and back of that form, not just the front of it. They want to know, how long are you letting employees, go ahead and giving them time to get into the plan? They're looking at the actual operation. They look at any kind of plan reporting requirements and all of your disclosures. Your disclosures are all of your notices, and we're going to talk about those notices in a couple of slides. It may also look at service providers. Sometimes an audit may come to the employer as the plan sponsor for an audit when actually they want to look at the carrier or the insurer to see what's going on. So again, that's another aspect of it. It is typically lengthy and it can be very involved. And as we go through some of the things that they'll ask, you will see that in 1 minute. And then finally, a desk audit. A desk audit is basically someone is sitting behind a desk at the Department of Labor, and they say, we want to see information on your plan, and then they're going to see if you're complying or not. What does the process look like? Generally, you will either get an initial call or a letter. And basically, if it's a call, they'll say, we may be showing up at your doorstep in 2 weeks, or it may be that we're going to send you a letter requesting certain information. If you get that letter, it will include definitely, they're usually included as an appendix, and it will say, we're going to give you a listing of information that we want to see. Generally, it'll be plan documentation, and this really gives you an idea of the scope. If you get a schedule or an appendix that's 3 or 4 pages long, then you know that they're really looking at everything under the plan. Sometimes, but more than likely with the fiduciary audit, this will occur, that they will also do an on-site visit. Generally, they'll ask you for the documentation, and then once they review the documentation, they'll say, well, we want to come on site and look at any additional information. In actually ending up the process, if the Employee Benefit Security Administration, if they don't find any infractions, you'll get what's called a no action closing letter. And believe me, those are few and far between. If there are infractions, you'll get what's called a voluntary compliance notice letter. And this basically will say, we found fault, we found violations in these areas. We're going to give you the opportunity to correct them. That's why it's called voluntary compliance. What you need to be aware of is that the DOL, as to plan participants, if an employer does not voluntarily comply, then the DOL has the right to go ahead and sue the plan on behalf of those participants. Why do I say a no action closing letter is really few and far between? Because generally the statistic out there is that 75% of the plans that get audited, the DOL will find some type of violation. So let's start and go ahead and look at some of the things that they'll be asking you for. If you get this letter, I can guarantee you, or I should say probably about 99% guarantee you, that the letter is starting out something like, we're reviewing your plan, and based on the Appendix A, within 10 days, please provide us this information. This 10 days is very limited because what they're expecting is that you already have all of this information and you have it compiled nicely and neatly somewhere, and all you have to do is pull it out and send it to them. Well, we know that's not how things generally go. So the first thing that they'll be looking for is your plan document. We know that the basic ERISA requirement is that all employee benefit plans must be established and maintained in writing. So that tells us we must have a plan document. Key thing to remember, an insurance contract is not an ERISA plan document. Usually the ERISA welfare plan document, it will wrap around the insurance contract, but the contract standing by itself is not that plan document. Then we're going to look to see, has this plan actually been adopted? Have the people who are responsible for the plan, did they sit down at a meeting and say, yes, these are the benefits we want to provide to our employees, and we're going to go ahead and memorialize this by everyone is going to sign off on it saying we're adopting the plan. Then they're going to also be looking to see if any changes have been made to the plan. The next basic requirement they'll be looking for is the summary plan description. Now, remember we need to have a plan document. And then to the participants, one of our disclosure requirements, we have to provide a summary of that plan document. That's the word SPD. And this document puts the technical language that's in the plan document into layman's terms. It makes it much more easier for a participant to understand than trying to read a contract. The SPD, it's really the primary method of communicating the plan benefits to employees. Another thing we have to remember, the benefit booklet or the certificate of coverage that we may receive from an insurer generally does not meet the standard of an ERISA compliant SPD. It usually lacks several important required items. One thing that I see most often is it doesn't even have the name of the plan in it. It may have the name of the employer, but not the name of the ERISA plan. And then they'll also be looking to say, did you amend this plan? Did you change any of the benefits? And if you did you give your employees what's called a summary of material modification? We know it as an SMM. We'll also be looking for changes. As of 2012, we know that what's called the SBC, the Summary of Benefits and Coverage, has to also be provided. And along with that SBC, there is a glossary that has to be provided, and then examples. We talk about the 5500. This is the annual reporting of the plan financial information. A 5500 has to be prepared by a plan that has at least 100 participants in it as of the first day of the plan year. If they ask you for a 5500, you would just have to give the explanation why you don't have to comply. We did not have 100 participants, so we did not do a 5500. Also, they're probably going to ask for documents identifying employee and employer contributions or premiums. Now, I'm not sure how to phrase this, but basically the Department of Labor doesn't care how much you're charging that employee for the premium. Now, we know under the Affordable Care Act that coverage has to be affordable if you're an ALE. But basically, their general thought is, we're not really caring if you're collecting 50% or 75%. What they do care about is that anytime an employee makes a contribution to the plan, meaning they have to pay part of the premium, that employee's money is considered a plan asset. And that's what the DOL is concerned about, because a plan asset can only be used to benefit a participant. It can never be used to benefit an employer. So that's why they're checking. They're saying, did you collect any plan assets, and what did you do with them? Did you give them to the proper party? Did you send them to the carrier? Or if you're self-insured, did you pay for the benefits? They're really setting up cross-reference points here. So they want to see what was deducted from an employee's pay and where did that money go? Where did those plan assets go? And continuing in our document request, remember, get all this stuff together within 10 days, we talk about HIPAA documents. And I've really actually condensed the list here because if you actually would get an audit, the audit letter will include a lot of information under HIPAA. They're going to say, what are your rules for enrollment and eligibility? They want to know, are you providing special enrollment rights notices to participants? And then they want to know, if anybody is asking for a special enrollment right, what's your procedure for enforcing that? And what's the process for them asking you for that right? Who do they have to go to? The key thing is they are also continuing to ask for pre-existing condition information. Now, we all know pre-existings went away because of the Affordable Care Act, and certificates of credible coverage were also issued because of pre-existing conditions. And that went away also as of December 31st, 2014. But what's key to remember is that the DOL can go back. They generally will go back 3 to 5 years, but they really can go back as far as they want to when looking for these documents. So even though pre-existing conditions, certificates of credible coverage, they've only really recently gone away, they may still be asking for that information based on going back 4 or 5 years. The next thing that an investigator may want to look at is what's called compliance with Part 7 of ERISA. Now, there are a lot of health laws that are included in Part 7, and we recognize them as, we call them group health plan mandates. And they've also been included in what's known as the Public Health Service Act, PHSA, and also to the Internal Revenue Code, the IRC. When the Public Health Service Act includes a requirement, governmental plans have to comply with that. When the Internal Revenue Code is amended to include these mandates, a church plan has to comply with that. And why I'm stressing this is because oftentimes a governmental plan or a church plan will say, oh, I don't have to worry about this. They'll never ask me these questions. And that's incorrect because other federal laws that they have to comply with actually incorporate a lot of these ERISA requirements. So they'll be asking for notices. What about your Newborns and Mothers Health Protection Act? Did you give that notice out? Generally, employers don't give this notice, but it's because this information is usually in the benefit booklet. And if the benefit booklet is included as part of the SPD, the employee is receiving that. Then they'll ask you about Women's Health and Cancer Rights Act. The key thing with this is this notice has to be given upon eligibility, and then it's also an annual notice. So you may have this information in your SPD or benefit booklet, but are you giving that every year? And if you're not giving it every year, you haven't met your annual requirement. If you have a wellness plan and you're subject to HIPAA because of your wellness plan, they want to see, have you given the proper notice? Are you giving alternative standards to employees who may not be able to meet your wellness standards? The next is called the CHIPR notice, Children's Health Insurance Program and Reauthorization Act. This is also an annual notice. So they want to see, did you give this out annually? Or did you only give it out maybe every 3 years? Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, GINA, generally, again, they want to make sure that you're not discriminating against anyone based on family medical coverage. Our Mental Health Parity Act, I've already mentioned, this is an area that they are really looking at. They actually want to see, have tests been performed to make sure that the benefits that you offer as to medical coverage is also being offered in the same manner for any substance use or mental issues. Next we have COBRA. We're going to be looking to see, did you give out your initial notice, but also did you comply with any other notice requirements? Remember, there are 6 of them altogether. And then we have Michelle's Law, but they want to know that if you've complied with that. The key things with all these notices is it's process, process, process. As I've indicated, some of these are an annual notice, some may not apply. You need to have someone who knows when these things have to be provided and to whom. Continuing with the request, now we're getting into the Affordable Care Act side of it and how our plans have changed due to the ACA. So one thing they're going to want to know, the first thing is, are you a grandfathered plan? And if you are grandfathered, have you been including those disclosure statements? A grandfather notice or disclosure is required with any information that you provide to a participant that discusses benefits. We have one exception. An EOB does not have to have a grandfather notice on it. So when you give out your summary plan description or the benefit booklet, or you may be putting out a memo based on during open enrollment saying, gee, our benefit plans are changing in this manner. You discuss benefits, you should put your grandfather notice on that. I've seen plans where they have been told by the Department of Labor that you lost your grandfather status because you didn't provide this notice. The records, and if you do say you're grandfathered, they're going to want to say, prove it. Show us that you're still grandfathered. They'll want to go ahead and see your records as of March 23rd, 2010, the day that the Affordable Care Act was enacted. They're going to look to see, okay, what kind of contributions were you making as an employer? Has that decreased by more than 5% in the last 5 or 6 years? What about co-payments and deductibles? Has that increased by more than 15% plus consumer price index for medical care? So those are the things they're looking at to say, yeah, you are grandfathered. The next, if we say, well, we're not grandfathered, they want to say, prove it. Show us that you're non-grandfathered. Are you giving out what's called the patient protection rights? Certain notices saying that an employee can pick any PCP that he wants, that there won't be pre-authorizations for OBGYN visits, that emergency room services to a certain extent are paid the same in and out of network. Some other ACA requirements, an adverse benefit determination. This has been around for years, ever since ERISA has been around. Again, they're now just putting it to a higher level because, again, the Affordable Care Act increased the responsibilities for these adverse determinations. I want to see your internal and external claims. Now, if you're fully insured, the carrier is responsible for proving that. So you don't have too much of an issue there. However, if you're self-insured, you're responsible for internal and external claims. And one of the requirements for a self-insured group is that you have to have an independent review officer. You have to have at least 3 of them for your external reviews. They'll want to see the contracts that you have with those individuals. Talk about rescission of coverage. They'll say, did you rescind anybody's coverage? And if you did you give them a 30-day notice? Well, look at that dependent coverage to age 26. And then finally, they're going to be looking for copies of the insurance invoices. Well, you received an invoice. Let's see what the premium that you paid. Let me see the employee deductions that made up that premium. They'll be looking at payroll records. And also this distribution of medical loss ratio rebates. In our area, we don't have a lot of employers who are getting MLR rebates. However, why the DOL looks at them? Because a rebate is based on premiums that were paid to the carrier. And remember, some of those premiums were paid by employee contributions, which again are plan assets. So they want to make sure that if an employer received a rebate, did they use that money properly? Did the portion of it that was a plan asset go back to the participants and not to the employer? And then finally, all of those notices I was talking about, you know, your women's health and cancer right, your HIPAA special enrollment, they're going to want to see the list of people or participants to which you provided them. Now, I do want to clarify, they pick and choose when they ask for lists. I have seen several DOL audit letters in the last couple of months, and some of them will say, yeah, we want the special enrollment rights list, and one will take that off, but they'll ask for a list of another notice. So again, you have to watch this out. So that's basically when you go through a DOL audit, that's going to be the process, and that's going to be some of the things that they could be looking for. Actually, the Department of Labor, they went ahead and they posted, and they said that these are the top, 6 or 7 infractions that they found. And the first one is the failure to provide benefits in accordance with the plan terms. Why that is key is because an employer that sponsors a plan is called the plan sponsor, plan administrator. And your key fiduciary role is to govern that plan according to its terms. So that's what the DOL wants to see. It's saying, well, you said you were going to provide medical and dental coverage. Are you providing that? Are you providing it to everyone who's eligible? Or you may be cherry-picking employees. Improper or arbitrary claims adjudication. We know what arbitrary means. It means that there's not a sound reason why a decision was made as to the adjudication of a claim. Failure to follow the claims procedure rules. There are different claims and appeals process depending on what type of benefit you have. It's a medical benefit. It's a much more narrow claims process. Sometimes if someone has a claim under a medical, if it's really considered an emergency, a response is required within 72 hours. Naturally, a claim for a life benefit due to death or a disability benefit, it has a broader process. It gives you more of a time frame to respond. Number 4 on that list, failure to forward employee premiums to the insurance provider. I think this is key, and this would really cause the DOL to really scrutinize you a little more than they normally would. Also, the issue I've mentioned about failure to provide the mental health benefits in parity with medical and surgical. There are certain tests that generally the carrier or the insurer must do to make sure that it says, well, if everyone, and actually it really gets into a really convoluted, test that they look at. They talk about whether the benefit is a qualitative benefit or a non-qualitative benefit, and again, how it's paid. And they will look to see, geez, you had so many medical claims, and this is how you paid them, and then you had so many mental health parity claims, and that's how you paid them. And then finally, and I'm not going to say last but not least, because the notice requirement, it is a big one. There are a lot of notices that have to be required, but this is one of the main infractions that the DOL is finding, the failure to provide the notices. So for the next couple of minutes, let's talk about some best practices. So We talk about preparation. This is what you should really try to do, even if you would never be audited. And I say never be, but I think that's really a long shot because, again, of what their initiative is. First of all, you should identify your ERISA plans and what benefits are you offering it, what benefits are under your plan. And then you start with that document compilation. So do you have that plan document? Do you have an SPD? You really should go ahead and have a binder and just start putting all this information in it and tabbing it so you know where you can find certain information. Look at your administrative procedures and practices. Who is responsible for handling what? Is there only one person on your team that has to do everything? So, you know, your practices, you may have to keep them more narrow because it's only one person doing it. You're not sharing, you know, all the responsibility. And if you do have several people on your team, are you communicating back and forth? You know, am I clear that I'm supposed to be getting this notice and not someone else? We talk about maintaining written meetings or minutes. If there are a meeting of the owners or the shareholders and they talk about the employee benefits and they want to make changes, keep documentation of those meetings. Maintain all your records and documents well organized in a single location. Some of you, and I think maybe there's a couple of you even on the call today, I've been doing what's called compliance reviews for them. And this is one thing that we talk about. I go to some clients and they have everything all nice and neat in one area. And, you know, some other clients, it's like, oh, I think it's in this office or that office. So try to maintain everything in one organized place. Hold internal discussions. You know, even if you are only one person as to, you know, HR management and employee benefits, still talk to the owner and maybe express saying, you know, geez, I'm having trouble either getting notices out in a timely manner or being able just to have the time to go ahead and always collect the information and keep it organized. Designate who's responsible for it. The key thing is you should have someone who is knowledgeable in these legal requirements. Someone who knows, yes, we have to give out these notices. Yes, we have to give out an SPD. This is when we're required to do that. We talk about monitoring plan service providers. When you're fully insured, it's pretty hard because we can't go in there and say, okay, open up all your claims because I want to look at them. However, it doesn't hurt every several years to say, I wonder if this is the best provider that we're working with. Another key thing, if the participants request information from you, promptly respond to it and fully respond to it. A plan participant, if they ask you for a notice, if they ask you for an SPD, if you don't provide that within 30 days, they can come back and then they may either call the Department of Labor, which could prompt an audit, or they actually can sue the plan and receive up to $110 per day for every day that they didn't receive the information. Correct failures. You know, I don't think any plan, even plans that have 5 or 6 people in a department working on employee benefits, something can, you know, fall through the cracks. Somebody is sick one day and doesn't send a notice. There are just things, and I always like to call that life, that happens. So, but if you do find something that, you know, you find, geez, we should have done this, then correct it, and correct it when you find it. And then always document your good faith effort. You know, that is one thing that the DOL takes into consideration. So they see you trying to make that effort to comply as much as possible. And then finally, if you do get audited, some best practices, have a response team. Identify a point person that's going to deal with the DOL, and then notify any other affected persons. Notify your manager or the owner, or again, partners, management. If you find, you know, that it's going to be more than a simple desk audit or just looking at one issue, you should probably engage counsel because there may be some issues that may be raised that you would need to have a legal opinion on. Establish the communication protocol, and I really think this is probably the key thing. we always have to remember, these individuals, these investigators, they're doing their job just like we go in and do our job every day. Think of the things that irritate us. You know, if you have a problem and you call a company and you talk to 3 different people on 3 different days, don't you get irritated? Don't you say, don't they know my problem? Isn't anybody communicating? The investigator may say the same thing. Why can't I just talk to one person who knows what I'm looking for? Respond promptly and politely. Again, they're just doing their job also, so we kind of keep that in the back of our mind. Understand the timing. Remember I said at the very beginning, when you get that letter, it will say, please provide us this information within 10 days. If you don't think that you can get that to them in the 10 days, you need to go ahead and communicate with them. Geez, I don't think I can get it in 10 days. Can you give me any additional time? Can you give me an extension? They'll let you know if you can get an extension or not. The key thing is document it. Ask for the extension in writing. Because if you have to respond and you respond 20 days late and you don't have any proof to say that, gee, the investigator said I have 20 more days, then it's considered not a timely response then. For on-site visits, give them a separate area with a door preferably. The last thing, remember we talked about memorandums of understanding. So the last thing you want happening is a Department of Labor investigator sitting in an office and someone is walking by complaining about not being paid overtime, or, you know, or somebody that they feel they're being harassed, because that investigator may have the obligation to go and say, I think they may have a problem here. You ought to come in and look at them also. And then finally, organize an order of request. What you should do is, if you are audited and you receive a letter outlining what they want, that's really how you should respond to it. Start numbering them, make your copies and number them accordingly, and keep a copy of everything that you do provide to an investigator. Bind it. Keep it all in one place. If you have several binders, number the binders. Tell them, reference to them if they're looking for something. Oh, the answer to number 23 is in binder 3 under tab 23. After the audit, debrief the appropriate personnel. You know, you'll have a feel once you respond to an audit where you think you're at. And then don't speculate on anything outside your area. You know, I know we want to be good citizens. We want to try and help the investigator. We want to try and help the company. But if we're not sure of an aspect because of something somebody else does, talk to that person. You know, you want to give accurate information. And with that, we've come to the end of our DOL, talking about the process, what kind of audits, the information that they'll request, and then some tips on preparation and what can occur. So at this time, if you have any questions, if you haven't already typed them in, please do so, and we will answer them to the best of our ability. Okay, we'll give you another minute or so to see if there's any questions. Okay, at this point we don't have any questions, so I'll give you a reminder. First of all, thank you so much for attending today. And as a reminder, we will send out the PowerPoint and recording of the webinar to you within the next couple of days. Our next webinar is going to be on Thursday, May 12th. And it's going to be on what's happening, benefit updates. You know, we're going to be 6 months into the year. We did receive some ACA updates as of December, which we haven't really discussed, so we'll be talking about that. And with that being said, again, since we don't have any questions, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day today. Bye.